I'm so happy to be welcoming Dan Van Tran to this Substack Live on Lead Without Limits. We'll give folks a minute to sign in. This conversation is going to be about the reality of being a tech leader in 2025. I feel like there are so many words in there in that conversation. If we just, play a little Mad Libs, people have a lot of feelings. I know I did, even as I wrote out the concept. I was like, oh, yeah, feelings. And I'm so happy that I'm joined here with Dan, who I just recently met. I met at an Overdrive AI event here in lovely New Jersey. My friend Mark Yakinich invited me, and I got to witness Dan on stage. He is a fantastic speaker. If you haven't heard him speak before, we're going to have a treat today. He's also a fantastic writer. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Dan, he is the CTO of collectors.com. But his career started very early when he was creating games for his classmates as a student on his TI 82, which for those of you who are not nerdy enough to remember, I had to think for a minute. I was like, wait a second, that's a calculator. But I remember it well. And he went on to work at FactSet, which I worked in investment banking, so I know FactSet. And I'm sure some of the folks listening will as well. And then Flatiron Health. And he has also become an investor. He is a founder. He helps early stage startups. And he really is somebody who cares. So if you go to his website, Dan Tran, did I just get your name wrong?
Dan Van Tran.
Dan Van Tran, okay, .com. You'll also see his wonderful writing where he's talked about being an introverted leader, what it means to lead. And so there's just a lot of thoughtfulness to him, in addition to his incredible hobbies and these companies that he's built. And so I'm going to let Dan introduce himself, maybe share why he decided to join this conversation today, too.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. That was a very humbling introduction. Appreciate it. Yeah, great to be here. One of the reasons that I have been doing a lot more speaking and talking is because we are living in a really weird time. Like Kathy mentioned, there's just a lot of stuff happening, and especially you thought that the pandemic was a weird time. Well, everything that's happened since then, it's been really tumultuous. And it's just, especially as a technical leader, things are redefining themselves in a way that we haven't really seen, at least in my career, as someone who's in tech ever. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of really talented people who have taught me a lot about how to navigate change in general. Um, and even this change is very challenging for all of us. But I've been sharing some of those lessons just so that we can get through it together and hopefully come out better on the other side. And I'm sure we will. But yeah, just a lot of lessons around how to navigate AI and remote work and overemployment and all the things.
So true, so true. Yeah, when we spoke, I felt like, oh my gosh, this is a leader who is really human, but has also had to deal with all the tough decisions that C-level leaders are making these days. How do you structure your teams? How do you go and set the right goals? I even remember in your speech, you talking about testing different AI tools, but also being a little skeptical and, figuring out how do you track the impact, when is there really impact, or when is it just something you assume but then you can't verify? So there was a lot of meat in that talk that you gave. For today's conversation, and by the way, for everybody who's joining, if you want, please feel free to share where you're joining from, share your questions. I will try to get to them as we go through the conversation, because I really want this to be interactive. And so for you, Dan, tell us a little bit about how you got to this stage in your career. Why did you choose to become a tech leader? There's a lot of fun in being a tech contributor, if you will.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned at the beginning, I started my career programming with a TI-82. But actually my career in tech started well before that. So my dad actually before I was born, and I'll share a little bit of the backstory in a minute, but he came over here as an immigrant, and so he really didn't have any degrees or skills that were very lending themselves to a specific career path. And so he just tried a lot of different things. He had a very technical mindset, but wasn't quite sure how to apply it. And back then, the most that he did relative to that was working on an assembly line, putting together transistor radios, things like that. And technology back then was still a lot of robotics and assembly and not as much software as it is back then. This is like the late 70s, early 80s. So he tried a few different things. He was a short order chef at one point. He did a lot of odds and ends, worked in like elevators, and then eventually just found that he really fell in love with telecommunications, phone lines, and installing phone systems and wiring things. And it was very physical work, but still had a lot of technical components because you still had to test the signal, and there was a joy in being able to set up this giant system for he mostly worked on facilities like public schools and government buildings. And so to be able to have a brand new building that's set up and his job was to set up all the phone lines and communications, he just really enjoyed it and the problems that it posed. So from there, he got into networking and with computer networks, and this was the beginning of networking. So people who are as old as I am, they'll remember that there was a point when computers couldn't talk to each other, at least consumer computers. And so Windows 3.11 was actually the very first version, that was in the mid 80s, that allowed computers to start talking with each other. So at that point, my dad started trying to teach himself, how do I actually set these systems up? And that's what led him to have a laptop from his company. And just to, again, give you a sense of how old I am, it was a monochromatic laptop, black and white. There was no color. You actually had a trackpad mouse that was a roller ball that attached to the side of the keyboard, and then you hooked it up with a serial cable. So they didn't make those sorts of things anymore. But he would then connect that to these different modems and machines and just start programming them. And so he'd bring his laptop home at night. And at that point, what I would do is I'd sneak it out from his bag and when he wasn't paying attention and just start messing around with it. Just playing around with things and breaking things and then trying to frantically figure out how to get it back into working order before he woke up the next morning. So he didn't know that I was messing around with it. Eventually saw me playing around with it and then just let me do it. But through that tinkering, I was able to learn a lot about just how the computer worked. And I really realized how much I loved just building things. And then I would teach my dad some things. My dad would teach me a lot of things. And so together we just learned how to use computers. And so give that a few more years, and I was a little young then, but eventually I started getting a video game system and a Nintendo and started playing video games. And then I realized, well, wait, video games seem like they're just software. I wonder if I could build my own video games. But given that we were pretty poor still, being immigrants, we couldn't afford a computer. And back then, even really, this was again dating myself, but 286s, 386s, 486s, this is pre-Pentium. Even those computers were thousands of dollars, and so we really couldn't afford one. So what I ended up doing was finding that one of my friends in school was playing a game on his TI 82, a graphing calculator. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize you could use graphing calculators for anything other than doing math. And so I asked him if I could borrow it, took it home for a weekend, saw that the way that you actually launch the game is by opening the source code and then hitting run. So you could see the whole code, how it all worked. And I realized based on that, I could reverse engineer from the code how the game was working and then teach myself how to code. So um, still, calculator was like $150, $160 back then. So still a lot of money. About a few weeks of groceries for my parents. I knew that they would never just outright let me buy one. But I went to this private school. They had a bookstore. And what I knew was that they would only charge for, send a bill once a month. And so if I timed it right, I could charge a calculator to my account, have the calculator for almost, 4 weeks, and after that point, then I'd have to own up to my parents. But I'd have 4 weeks to try to figure out how do I prove to them that it's worth keeping this thing and that it's actually a good thing for my future. So took the gamble, charged to the calculator, and every night for nights and weekends for 4 weeks, I just was reverse engineering games, trying to code up my own games. And by the end of that period, I actually coded a couple games, one of which was this home run derby, where you basically have this little baseball that's going down from the top to the bottom of the screen. You just had to time it right to hit the button to hit the ball, and if you hit it the right way, you would hit a home run, and the ball would come at different speeds. Very simple game, but it allowed me to learn the basics of programming, and it allowed me to, more importantly, put that game in front of others, my friends and peers, and get their feedback. And they were really entertained. They all wanted a copy of it, and so like half the class was playing that game. Finally, my parents get the bill, and my mom calls me up, and she is fuming. And she's like, "Oh my God, like $150. How are we going to afford this? Why did you do this? What is this for?" So I showed her, "Oh, look, I bought this calculator. It's used for classes. Why couldn't you borrow one? Like, why couldn't you use like the schools?" Well, I wanted to teach myself how to code. And so look at what I've done. Here are all the things I've done. The teachers think it's cool. The students love it. I'm getting a lot of good feedback about it. But like, all right, so you're programming these games. What's it going to be for? Well, I think in the future, I could build software and computers. I know we can't afford a computer now, but this will teach me basically the same skills. Okay, let me talk to your dad about it. They go off into a room. A few minutes later, they come back out. All right, you can keep it, but don't do that again. So that's what launched my programming career. Is like I finally got my hands on something that I could tinker with and play with, and I wouldn't be breaking my dad's laptop every day. But
That's
that's what started
amazing.
getting me into coding and programming and technology.
I love that. I mean, and for anybody who's listening, I mean, the way you tell that story, there's obviously it's a family story, it's a childhood story, but also so many executive level capabilities demonstrated. Everything from the curiosity to the creativity, and the investigation, the budgeting skills of like, oh, let me time this so that I can go get the bill, at a certain point where I have proven a bit more capability, and then all the work that you did to make sure that you could evidence that there was real value there. In addition to the fact this is super heartwarming and this is like your start in the tech world. That's incredible. And so then, you kind of let's fast forward a bit to um your work at Collectors, like, what brought you to Collectors? I know you care about this personally, but not everybody can match up personal interest with their job. And then also the stage with which you entered Collectors, the company is very different than where you've
Mhm.
brought it to today.
Yeah, so Collectors was actually a really interesting journey. I actually got into card collecting as a kid. Going a little bit more into the backstory, and I'll give the fast version because I know I can be a little wordy. But so my parents, they were immigrants from Vietnam. They were brought up during the war, and the people, they were in the South. And so the communists were coming from north to south. They ultimately got to my parents' homes for their families, and so they tried to flee. And my mom's dad actually had a bit of money that he had hidden away, so he took that, tried to smuggle out all of his kids. He had 11 kids. My mom and my dad, who at the time was her boyfriend, were the only ones that made it out. And so they were smuggled through cargo ships, eventually made it to Hong Kong and refugee camps. Eventually, then were given a choice of a neutral country to go to. They chose America. And so they were sponsored by three families out of this church in Long Island. And they told them to call them mom and dad. And so as a result, I had three sets of grandparents here in the States, plus my two real sets of grandparents. But they really treated us like family, and it was really great. The reason why I bring that up is because one of those sets of grandparents, their kids actually ended up giving me a set of baseball cards when I was younger, and that was my first real exposure to trading cards. And I was just so fascinated about it because there were all these like crisp pieces of cardboard with pictures of the players and stats and history and all the data. Like it was such a data rich sport, and I already was very technical and like very interested in just looking at these numbers and understanding what they meant. And it was just so fascinating to me, and so I just wanted to collect more and more cards. I got into basketball and sports, and so. It was just really cool. And so I collected cards as a kid. And then, like most people who collect things, so, that you get out of it, you go into phases of like waves of collecting, not collecting. And so I didn't collect much until college, collected a little bit, but not much. And then when I was at Flatiron in 2018, we actually had a big exit event. And so we got acquired. And so all of us were just really excited about that. But also, even though we knew that we couldn't take it easy, I mean, we were trying to solve cancer, we could take it a little bit easier. And so I was going to celebrate by getting back into one of my old hobbies. And I thought, well, now that I have a little bit of money, and maybe I should spend some on trading cards again. So I was researching trading cards, and as I was Googling things, my boss's name kept coming back up in my search result. And I was like, oh, like, why is the CEO popping up when I look for trading cards? And I realized he is a huge collector, one of the biggest in the world. And he was in the news at the time for having purchased the most expensive Michael Jordan card at that point in time, $350,000, set a world record. The fun fact is that that card is now worth probably between 2.5 and $3 million. So great
Wow.
investment for 2018. Um, but so I reached out to him and I'm like, hey, like it is amazing that you collect trading cards. I didn't realize like I collect them too. I'd love to learn more about what you look for and what you collect. So we would nerd out about cards from that point on. We were probably the only two major card collectors in the company because it's such a weird niche hobby. But so you fast forward to May of 2020, he reaches back out and he says, hey, so I am actually advising this company. They're a sports memorabilia auction house. Their platform is horrible, keeps crashing, keeps going down. I think we can build something better. What do you think? And so I was actually looking for a side project anyway to learn the newest technologies like AWS services, new front end technologies. So I took him up on it, nights and weekends. He basically just gave me a credit card and said, "Go nuts." And so I nights and weekends we just started building up this platform. Eventually, got a couple more engineers to volunteer with me, and by December we had a pretty good proof of concept going. So he reaches back out and he said, "Hey, great news! So Zen Auction, our little side hustle, is going to be silently acquired by the company we're building it for. I'm going to be acquiring this company, Collectors, and next year I'm going to have Collectors acquire the auction house. Would you be interested in leading tech across all these companies and any future acquisitions?" So it was very intriguing to me, but at the same time, I was in charge of both regulatory work and the interoperability strategy at Flatiron, which was stuff that I knew no one else would really want to touch. It's kind of like the crappy stuff, but more importantly, I didn't quite know what I would be getting myself into by going into this new company, and it sounded fun, it sounded really interesting, but I really had no idea. Outside of being a consumer of the company and their services, what was actually underneath. So he said, "Look, I'm going over there next month. Come with me. Come talk to the leaders, ask questions, learn more about the business." So I went with him. And I remember going on the tour of the operations and seeing just how broken it was. Not because the company itself was broken. I mean, they were doing quite well, but because you could tell that they scaled quickly and they didn't really leverage technology or modern, even operational processes appropriately. And so I could see multiple opportunities where it's like, oh, instead of post-it notes, we could digitize that. Oh, instead of using spreadsheets, you can put that in a database. Even things like AI, ML, and robotics, you could just see opportunities to apply that throughout the process. And as I'm talking to the leaders, you could tell that a lot of them were just trying to stay afloat because there was so much new business coming in. They had no time to think about change or technology, so they couldn't even spend any time researching what to do, let alone have the experience of having done that and apply it. And so I saw the opportunity. The whole 2 to 5 year vision just appeared in my head as I was going through that tour. And so I told him, yep, I'm all in. So the company itself was a public company prior to us coming in. It was just a low end stock market stock, but we acquired it to bring it from public to private. I say we. I had nothing to do with the financing, but it was acquired for $850 million. Nat Turner, my CEO, plus Steve Cohen, owner of the Mets, and they acquired the company to bring it from public to private, $850 million. Um, and then we just got to work. And so I started thinking through what to do from a tech side. There were 22 people in tech at the time, around 11 software engineers. And the company itself was 750 people, about to be 1,200 by the end of that year. This was around January, February. So I had to really figure out, given that they were really collapsing under their own success, how do I quickly turn things around? And so I started by looking at the people and trying to figure out, okay, so a lot of times with acquisitions, I think the thing that people fear is that a new company is going to come in and just like wipe people out, just get rid of everyone, replace them with
Yeah.
better people and better technology and just like it's going to be basically what the private equity things you hear about, like it's going to be a turnaround job. Well, that's not how it really works in real life, right? Like the best thing to do is actually figure out, well, what does good look like and what can I do to maximize how many people stay around for that journey? Because especially when you look at it, the company was founded in 1986. A lot of the people have been at the company since that point. You had people in tech that had been there for 25, 30 years. You never hear about companies that have people, a lot of these the companies you hear in tech haven't even been around for that long, let alone have people who stay for that long. Most people turn around after 2 to 5 years. And so that's a wealth of information and stories and knowledge that you want to tap into if possible. And you don't want to just have them on retainer and then boot them. Like you want to actually see like what can I do to get the most out of this person and find a role for them where they can maximize their skills and talents. So I spent a lot of time talking to each individual and understanding a lot about what they were doing, what they were bringing to the table, what things were missing. And I realized a lot of what they didn't have was the expertise of just leading a mid-sized to enterprise-sized company. They didn't have knowledge of the most modern paradigms and technology, the languages, the platforms, but otherwise they were very passionate, very smart. They were very interested in the subject matter expertise. They had a lot of other skills in various technologies, but they weren't organized in the right way to make the most out of their talents. And also, they didn't really have a good ladder, career ladder on what to do next, how to grow. And so they all had a smattering of different skills and talents, and none of it really amounted to growing in any specific way. They were just all generalists. And so what I built was a career ladder, and I started building discrete career ladders for data versus systems versus software versus QA versus corporate IT. Um, and then also started bringing in managers who were familiar with how big systems work. I set up a organization chart so that you can have departments that were then organized so that you didn't have one person building software across 5 or 6 different departments. And you didn't have someone who was responsible for systems across everything and also had to know a little bit of networking as well as a little bit of security, cybersecurity, but that you actually had discrete departments for each one of those. And also for QA, I made it so that they weren't just manual QA, that they actually were starting to build a vision for automation and longer term building up tools for the software engineers to self-service instead of them having to just get the work thrown at them over the wall and then for QA to just figure out how to test it. And so taking baby steps through the first year or so, we built these departments, hired new leaders, brought in new technologies, like increased our budget multiple times, which the board always reminds me. But at the end of that, we actually were then in a state where even within, I want to say 6 to 8 months, you could see the beginnings of where we are today. And it was organized well. You had good leaders in place. The people were growing rapidly in their roles and careers. They were very happy and engaged. And so the headline is that after about 14 months, the valuation of the company went from $850 million to $4.3 billion, not just due to me, due to a lot of things, but in part due to the what we unblocked from the technology, from the ability to clean up the operational processes, and really setting a foundation for us to scale longer term. And so that really is. A little more than what you were asking me, how we got into
No.
collectors and transport, but like that's really what engaged me. So it wasn't really necessarily just that it was a hobby that I enjoyed and doing things that I really enjoy, but more importantly to me, it was more of the challenge of how do you take this company that's been around for 35 years and really rebuild it while the plane is still flying. and where they have really something that like, hey, it's on fire. You really need to not just figure out how to do this in like your own time. You have to do it now. And so it was just such an interesting challenge to me that I really am glad I took it on, but that's really what drew me to it.
I love that story. That was so well told, first of all, so thank you. You were not wordy at all. In addition, I think there were so many key themes that came out. I'm going to highlight a couple, but I want to go deeper in one or two of them. One of them was what you said, which is people have this story about what an acquisition, what an integration process feels like. And you just talked about some very practical ways and very human ways that you led through, and I'm guessing your counterparts did as well, in a way that wasn't about going and, frankly, bringing in your own people and, wiping the slate clean. And the way in which you talked about how you met with folks and tried to really find a place for each person. I think that not enough of us hear these types of stories where it's not about the kind of Silicon Valley brash, bravado based leadership, where it's, your ego, your vision, but at the expense of others. In this case, the vision that you laid out needed these people, and you created a way for them to have a place in it. And probably they did. The 14 months is a very fast-paced transition. Everything from gathering that knowledge in and building out new ways of working, hiring new staff, integrating them in. That's very, very fast. I am curious, something you didn't talk about, is, interestingly, like, you held some very important roles at Flatiron, areas, as you said, that not everybody wanted to go and dive deep into, compliance, interoperability, and you had some specialization because that's what career ladders and the one that you built for collectors did as well. How did you go from that type of specialization, and you probably had other experiences early in your career, to being able to see a full system and then being able to design the key components in it when you yourself may not have known all those pieces? And
Mhm.
can you give also an example of, like, when did you maybe step in the wrong direction and then had to change it back? Like, how does that work as a leader?
Yeah, no, that's so it's very interesting because I think about that a lot. How when I talk to other people, um, it's interesting just how um, it's almost like dumb actually, but how I just go head first into some of these changes and I don't really have the fear of the unknown. And a large part of it goes back into, I think, just like the way that my parents were and how inspired I am by their story of just like they were 17, 18. I can't imagine going into a cargo ship and being in the cargo hold where it's dark and damp and you don't see people and you're just eating stuff off the ground. And in the middle of the night, you're going from one ship to the other and you're watching people fall into the ocean and you can't save them. You get to this refugee camp where you're put to work and like nothing I have is going to be remotely that hard. And so but a lot of it is I see and hear the stories of like what they went through and also just the opportunities that the sponsors, the three families gave us, and I just don't want to waste it. I want to make sure that I'm making the most of it. But so everything that I have, given that a lot of the reason why I'm able to be here and do these things is thanks to a large part everything that they did for me to be able to do this. I don't really have a fear of a lot of it, and so generally, what I end up doing is getting into it and realizing, like a lot of entrepreneurs realize, everything in this world, pretty much, especially in society and civilization, we built ourselves. Even down to the science and math, which we hold as truths, it's our way of understanding the world around us, but we defined it. It's not like we came into this world and it was like written somewhere and like, oh, this is how the world works and this is how physics works and math. We are making it up. And we know that we're not always right in all those ways. Um, Once you realize that everything that you have, that's around you, that you do, that you're living in, was made up by someone or a group of someone's, there really is no reason why you couldn't be and may not be one of those someones to build it for the next generation or people after you. And so coming into that, I realized, okay, well, I may not be able to do it myself, but putting together the right people and thinking about this in the right way we can change the world. We can actually do something that will have a material impact on people's lives and benefit us all. And so that gets rid of the first thing, which is the fear and just the way to think about the scale and how to approach it. So once I have that, and again, I think it's just one way to look at it is it's just kind of like a courageous. Another way is like it's kind of dumb. Like I'm just going ahead first. I'm like, oh, let's just see what happens. But the thing that I then think about is okay. So what does good look like? Like if things were like in the end state, everything's perfect. What would that actually look like? And for that, I may be able to define some things on my own. But for a lot of it, I just kind of know like, well, it's something along the lines of this, but I don't know much about this area. Let me go talk to someone who does know. And so that's when I reach out to someone. That's where you see entrepreneurs doing like the listing tours and everything else, right? Like going to talk to like one of my favorite stories is my CEO, Nat Turner. Flatiron Health is a cancer company. He was one of the two co-founders. He knew nothing about cancer prior to founding it. Um, in 6 years after he founded the company, it was acquired for $2.1 billion. He knew nothing about cancer and sold a cancer company for $2.1 billion after 6 years. And what he did, though, was him and his co founder, Zach, they just created a list of all these people and all these resources, like the top minds in different fields, and just found a way to talk to them, to meet with them, ask them questions, get them to be advisors, and just built up a whole panel of these people and just learn from them and didn't stop doing that the whole time. And so seeing this and then seeing just the success that he had and realizing everyone starts from somewhere, like we're not born with all the knowledge we have, I realized a short circuit to a lot of it is go to the person who already has been an expert in this and is doing this and ask them. But so you just get better at asking the right questions, finding the right knowledge, but just knowing where what you do know and then applying that, and then knowing what you don't know and figuring out how to close that gap. So once I built the blueprint of, okay, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, um, I then start building up the plan and the vision. Okay, so here's like where we need to get to and what it will look like. And then I take a look at where are we today? What's the state of everything and how far are we from that? And then I start mapping out the milestones, vetting it out with the experts, vetting out with the people on the ground today and saying like, hey, does this sound like too far of a reach? Figuring out what that first milestone is, and in each area, it's a different thing. So I actually thought about like, like I was mentioning earlier, the department design, the roles, the ladder. Each one of those had their own separate North Star and bridge on how to get from where we are today to there. And so for each one of those little milestones, I went around to talk to various people to get feedback around how feasible it was, because that first milestone is the most important one. It's the one where if you can set it to be both ambitious enough, but also realistic enough, people will achieve it. And after achieving it, they both have a vision for where things are going, and they're both um, riding the high from being able to do something so different and seeing the benefit and the difference in what it was, but also of where they were at, but also it being a significant enough change from where things were at, where it feels different, where it is a different change, where it is taking things in a different direction. And so where they start feeling a bit more brave about change, because change management is something that you hear a lot about, you see a lot of readings about in practice. Even some of the best leaders I've worked for struggle with change management. And it is where things end up failing. A lot of the founders I work with, they end up even if they have a great North Star, a great team, a great plan, a lot of times, in order for that startup to succeed, they need to get people to believe in the change that they're trying to advocate for. And they can't get people to that point, and that's where the startup fails. And so you really need to be able to envision what the change looks like, and then also find a point that lets people make that change in a way that works in the flows that they're already working on. Um, so that they're more willing to do it, but also shows enough of that North Star where they're willing to go along with you for the rest of that journey. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
And that has to happen at at least two different levels, probably three different levels when you think about not just the employees, but your investors, right? The
yep,
shareholders and your customers. right?
Yep.
Or partners that you are collaborating with. This is an ecosystem
Mhm.
of people that have to all be taken along for the ride. If any one of them revolts or, struggles with the change in a more overt way, it can impact the entire process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you and I don't think I've ever admitted this publicly before or told it publicly, but the board really was questioning my ability that first year, because this is before that valuation change, right? And they just saw how slow things were moving. They're like, okay, like you've been in a year, and from the board perspective, quarter after quarter, they weren't really seeing us getting ahead. It actually was getting worse. The backlog of collectibles that were being submitted, the business was going slower because I was adding more process and adding
Right.
more people who were onboarding, which took away the people who were trying to get work done. I was exploding the budget, and so
I
they
was
were
gonna say
just
you're
watching me
spending more
spend.
money.
Yeah.
No investor likes to see that.
Yeah, exactly. So they were watching me spend millions upon millions more money and not get from their perspective getting anywhere. And I was a first time CTO. I'd never
Mhm.
had that role before. And so they were like, is this guy going to work out? Like, what's going on? They were really thinking about potentially replacing me. And the thing that really that I had to convince them through my CEO was, look, like he knew my style and that like he believed in me, but he was like, you got to give me something to work with. And I was telling him, look, what I'm laying down is the foundation that will help the next 5, 10, 15 years of the company to continue to go on this on ramp to really accelerate. And you have to trust me. And here are the signals to look for. And it was a lot about engagement. It was a lot about the change and the shift in the organization of how work was getting done. Not necessarily how much of it was getting done, but how it was getting done. And so around like the 8 to 10 to 12 month mark was when things started shifting a bit and things started getting faster. Requests weren't just sitting on a desk; they were actually starting to get returned within a day, 2 days. And a lot of the work, the backlog of collectibles, are starting to at least plateau. It wasn't diving anymore; it was actually starting to stabilize. And so we were getting ahead of the work. The sites weren't going down every day like they were anymore. It was like, every few days, but it was a lot better. We weren't just hearing about issues from Twitter and the social media anymore. We actually were detecting them internally. Um, and so the board started giving me a little more patience, but even with the valuation change and us getting ahead of business, they were like, well, we don't know how much of that is actually due to the tech versus other things, right? Because there were operational changes too. And they were like, we still aren't convinced. And also, why are there still only 30 something people in tech? Shouldn't you have like every other company at this point? Keep in mind, this was 2021 to 2022. And 2022 was when Amazon increased their salary cap from 250 to $360,000. Meta, Google, everyone was doing a land grab for employees and engineers, and so everyone was doubling their engineering base. Meanwhile, we grew by maybe 5 to 10 engineers, and so they were looking and seeing like, hey, these companies are pulling in thousands, tens of thousands of engineers. You only increased by 5 or 10 engineers. Why is that? Are you incompetent? Are you not attracting the
What
right
do they
talent? Are you
know
not
that
looking at the right
you
thing?
don't know?
Right, exactly. Like, why are they doing so well and they're growing and we're not? And so I told him, look, trust me, we are growing sustainably. I'm trying to turn around the organization internally first before I go externally. And also look at the salaries that they're hiring these engineers for. I would put like a bet that they will all have to course correct how much they're spending on engineers in the next couple of years after this, whether that means laying them off, changing their salaries, doing whatever. They're paying high amounts now, but the ROI they're getting from each engineer won't match that. Trust me.
Right.
And at the time, it didn't feel that way, right? Like, and I was unsure. Like, I'm saying that how much I believed at least 50, 60%, but I wasn't sure. And so I started picking it up, and because at that point internally we were stable, so I started increasing the hiring, getting more ahead of it, and we started doubling the team year after year. And so we went from like the 20 to 40 to the 80 and to 120. But so by the end of the second year, we were at around 60 to 80. Things were stable. They were really good engineers. We had still retained most of the original engineers. There were some that we parted ways with because they weren't a good fit for the future, or they voluntarily decided to leave. But for the most part, we kept the majority of the engineers that were there when we acquired the company, which I think is a big success. Um, and then if you fast forward, yeah, like all the other companies, and they're continuing to do it to this day, they're course correcting. They're laying people off 10% at a time. They're changing the salaries. They're removing benefits. Meanwhile, we're continuing to add salaries, add benefits, continuing to grow even to this day through this economy. I think that I'm glad that they took a bet on me and continue to have confidence. At this point, they're not questioning it at all. And I'm taking advantage of that by asking for crazier things. At this point, I have their trust. That for a while there, it was definitely shaky. Yeah.
That's That's incredible. I mean, to both, stick to your guns, really go and trust your own instincts. We don't know, right? This is the reality. Not enough leaders like to admit it. We have a view. We use our critical thinking. We try to, make sense of it all, and we don't know. But you have to stick to what you believe is true, because if you just flow with the winds, the winds are often blowing in the wrong direction. And so, when you if you could give advice to people listening, what were some of the ways that you kept the investors, you kept the board waiting, and gave your CEO some food for, some fodder to use to help them stay the course with you?
Yeah, I think it's actually the same sort of consideration that you have when you're doing a startup, where you have to really consider what are the short-term versus mid-term versus long-term goals. And when you're building a system or making a trade-off, what are the things that you can trade off on that you'll have to pay it back later, but it's okay to have to rebuild something later or spend a little now and then spend a little more later to rebuild the same thing, um, versus something where you have to invest in now because it's going to be part of the key to scale or to succeed in the future. And so I made a lot of trade-offs. There were some cases where I did just build the bare minimum on top of crumbling infrastructure, just so that we could get the profits short term and make it so that we were bringing new business, even though I knew that mid to long term, it was hurting the organization. It wouldn't be something that we could build off of. Um, I had to have people working nights, weekends on some points, just like on call just to keep things running because they'd have to reset the servers manually or do the things where, like modern infrastructure, it's all automated. It detects it ahead of time. It pages you well ahead of the issue happening so you can correct it before it affects customers. We couldn't afford that luxury given that I needed to show results quickly. And so instead, I paid for a paging system where I could page someone in the middle of the night to let them know, hey, you got to go up, wake up and reset the server, or I myself would do it. And so I learned enough about the tech to do it. Um, we actually had most of our infrastructure still set up in a closet in the headquarters in Santa Ana, California, which was a very scary thing. I kept it there for a period of time, even though like a fire could have taken down the entire company, $1 billion company. And it would be hard for us to rebuild it, knowing that that was a risk. But at the same time, we could mitigate against that risk, keep a few extinguishers around or do whatever. It would buy us time to just go ahead and invest those resources in short-term wins to bring up the profits a little bit, or just manually be able to take care of business and buy ourselves a little more time so that the board would be happy. And then after things stabilize, we can then go back and actually move those things off. And so it wasn't until years two, three where we actually started moving stuff fully into the cloud, um, where people actually could start taking nights and weekends off, and the on call was far less. But yeah, so I looked at this past quarter, about the first quarter after the acquisition, we were spending about 200 hours a quarter on incidents and incident management. In Q3 of this past year, just about a month or two ago, we only spent 20 hours total, and across more engineers and more teams. We actually probably at least doubled, if not tripled, the surface area in terms of code products, and we're spending a magnitude less time, not just maintaining it. And so it took us a while to get that point, but the first few years it was rough. There was a lot of incident management, but then finally, once the board was happy and we made the right trade-offs, we were able to invest in that, and now everything's good. But you can't get to this point without making the right trade-offs early on.
Well, yeah, and that sounds like there were quite a few, and this is all while you were still restructuring the team, making changes regularly, right, to how you all
Yep.
operated, what tools you were using. How transparent were you with the investors and the board? How transparent were you with your team about the types of trade-off decisions you were making?
Yeah, great question. So I split it in two different ways. And this is the thing that I give as advice in general to a lot of people because it's applicable in almost every situation. As a human, we often have our own interest first, and it doesn't matter how like charitable you are or how empathetic you are. It's just human nature, and there's nothing wrong with that. But so the first thing anyone thinks about subconsciously is what's in it for me. Like what's my part in the situation, or how's this going to affect me? And so whenever you're thinking about stakeholders or other people, you just have to think about what's in it for them, right? What are they going to think about the what's in it for me? So from the board side of things, they're investing a lot of money in this company that they want to turn around, and they're expecting a lot of multiples from profits. But as a board, to be honest, and this is the same for a lot of boards, you don't necessarily care or want to know about the details of how the company operates. You don't have the brain space for it. Especially as a board member, you're probably an operator somewhere else. You probably are on a lot of boards. You can't possibly know what each company is doing down to the day-to-day level of an individual role or whatever. So
Nor is
even
it
as
your
a CT,
job.
nor is it your job, right?
Like,
It
flag
really
to
isn't.
board members, don't do that. Don't get in
Yeah,
there.
like, please don't. Yeah. um, but so even as a CTO, like they don't know or care what I'm doing. To them, I'm the blue collar, right? And that's fair. And that's something I like you want actually from your board, like for them to be thinking more about the business and the high level, right? So from their perspective, they're not going to care the trade-offs I'm making or whatever. Like as long as I'm helping them to get profits and I'm having the company be more profitable, and I'm doing it in a way that it has good morals and it is high value, um, and I'm doing it like hopefully cheaply. But so that's all they really care about. And so from their side, they didn't really want to know the trade-offs. At one point, they asked about like what's my plan around security. Another point, because there was no security team, I don't know if I mentioned that. There was no information security plan team, whatever. Even though they were a publicly traded company, it was crazy. But so they asked about that and what my plan was around that. So I had a vision around that. And then at one point they actually asked, okay, so you're bringing on all this tech debt and you're continuing to have tech debt. So we're happy about the profits, but what's your plan to manage this tech debt? Because they were thinking, oh, at some point it's going to topple the company over. So I told them about, and this is the whole other topic for some other time, but the fig tree pattern. So in Australia, there are these strangler fig trees that grow from the top down. They actually take over a tree, and so they take over a living tree, grow on top of it, and then eventually replace its roots and then replace the whole tree. And so it's kind of like a scary, frightening thing, but at the same time, it's like a great metaphor for how you can build tech. Instead of having to replace the tech with new tech next to it and then try to figure out how to move people from one thing to the other, just slowly grow on top of the old tech and then eventually replace it, but in a seamless way. And so I explained this pattern to them. And I did it in a succinct way, I think. But you could start like even within the 30 seconds, you could see some of their eyes glazing over. And so I was like, okay, just trust me here. Like, just let me tell you a little bit of detail, but more technical. And so, that was about the level that they needed to know. And so they were happy with the answers I was giving them from that side of things. From the engineer side of things, that's where I got into a lot more detail. One of my values is transparency, and I do feel like one of the things that you should do as a leader is hire a whole bunch of people who are hopefully smarter than you in a lot of different ways, and trust them. And in order to trust them, if you can't hire them and trust them, then maybe you should think about hiring them, whether or not you should hire them. I only hire people that I can fully trust, and so and that fully trust me. And so what I end up doing is telling them 100% of what I'm going to do, what the plan is, and in cases where it's like, oh, there's like, like certain things like, oh, SEC rules where I can't tell them things or whatever, I don't tell them. But they know why I can't tell them, and I tell them enough just for them to do their jobs, but they trust me. But other than that, I tell them everything that's in my head. I tell them exactly what I want to do, why I want to do it. I hope that they challenge it and make my idea better. But for the most part, I will tell them everything. And so for the changes that I want to make, They understood what changes I was aiming for, what the North Star was, what the bridge was to get us there, what the milestones may be. And I'm always open to pivoting. And so as long as directionally we are moving toward that, I know we're like not going to take that exact path. But at least they understand because of the transparency I'm giving them, the values I have, where they can make trade-offs, where they shouldn't make trade-offs. And they understand enough to tell their teams what to do, all the way down to the IC level. I want them to know what we're doing and why at any given point. I want them to know what we're doing as a company, why we're targeting this industry or this business and why. I want them to know the revenue numbers as much as possible to understand this is the impact that this change is making and why we're targeting this and why we're not updating this. Because when comes down to, hey, why are we keeping this piece of infrastructure around? It's so old, it's so much time and energy. I want them to know, well, we're keeping it around because it still generates this much revenue, but we're not going to invest any because we know that the investment is going to have ROI. And so our job is now to figure out how do we build enough automation to minimize the amount of time it takes us to maintain this thing. We know we're going to maintain it for the long run. Let's figure out what to do there. And they can do that without me telling them because they know enough of the transparency of here's how the business is thinking about it, here's how we're thinking about it. And so at the engineer level, within my team level, or even I'll even tell transparently the marketing team, HR, like all these, because
Yeah.
I think it's important for them to know too. But at the level of the employee and us on the ground who are actually doing the work, I want us to know everything about why we're doing things and have as much information as possible.
That's great. And it means that teams then can be working together as opposed to at cross purposes because
Right.
someone's lacking some sort of context or, is making some assumption that this other team wants to do this other thing. Instead, everybody knows. And then there's a lot less risk for people making assumptions.
Right.
Everybody knows.
Exactly. Yep.
That's incredible. We shouldn't, there's so many things I want to talk about, but we absolutely should not leave this conversation without talking about AI.
Mhm.
So, a lot of the things that you talked about around the transition of the company overall, the technology team, the systems, the tools, the new ways of thinking, frankly, are applicable with AI. Like, when did you start to implement AI? I'm always curious about this, because when we have these new types of technologies, there is always risk. Kind of we talked about before, where you don't know exactly how it's going to impact things. Maybe it's, you're not sure if it's stable yet, but if you wait, right, then you absolutely will never know. So, how
Never.
did you, right? There's a guarantee there. How did you think about AI? How much of it was already in your vision when you laid out the initial plan? How much did you have to kind of incorporate as you went?
Yeah. So a lot of so AI in general, to me, the way that you should think about it is it's a how, not the what. It's not the final goal. And so it's just like any other invention, robotics, internet, automation, like a lot of the products and services and businesses that exist, they're solving problems for people. And the solution isn't just going to be AI. It's going to be AI helps us to do XYZ, right? And so that's how you should be thinking of AI, not that it is a destination, it is a tool to help you to get to a destination. So you can't forget at the end of the day what your destination is, why your company exists, what your customers are expecting. So when I started thinking about AI, at Flatiron, I was fortunate enough to work with teams that were using AI. And so we were using machine learning to actually look at patient records to see if we can find patterns in cancer to better treat it and to be able to detect it faster, et cetera, et cetera. And so on my side, I was on the clinical side. We were preparing the data for preparation to go through pipelines that could AI could then process it. And so that was the limit pretty much of what I used AI for back then. At collectors, this is when the AI boom started happening with ChatGPT and everything else. And so I knew that AI and robotics was going to be key in how we succeed because everything was manual, right? Post-it notes, spreadsheets, like, things like that. So I knew that AI was going to be part of what we do. And so I started just keeping an eye on what was happening in the industry. But um, more importantly, I started looking for workflows and tasks that where AI could make a big difference.
Mm.
And so there were a few that I identified pretty quickly. And some of those were like identification of cards. So we have a whole team of people whose job is like you send collectibles in, and they are these researchers who have access to vast amounts of information over decades, books, encyclopedias, online resources, and just human expertise. And they're essentially art experts. And they can take a look at a collectible and know exactly what it is, when it was from, things like that. But there's no reason why AI couldn't do it more consistently, better, faster. And so now you would then evolve the experts into using these tools so that one expert becomes 20 experts, becomes 50 experts. So that's how we can unblock that part of the process. And so I was thinking about, well, if I were to build that AI, what would it look like? How would it, look? And so I started talking to all these different companies that were doing different sorts of computer vision and a lot of identification. And I realized the technology just isn't quite there. It could help with different parts of things, but not the full thing. And so, well, for the parts of things, like, does that add enough ROI where we spend, time and money investing in improving that? Um, will it justify the cost? And at the time, the answer was no.
Mm.
But at the same time, I knew that we would have to do that investigation continuously. So around 2021, actually, maybe 2022, I started building up an AI department, which consisted of, at that time, one person. And all they did was tinker, experiment, and try a lot of different things. And it wasn't until 2022, 2023 where we started adding a few more engineers. And at this point, we have maybe 10 to 15 engineers, PhDs, et cetera, working in that department. Um, and a lot of them were acquired before the full boom, and so we got them, ahead of them getting poached by everyone else, and they're still with us today, fortunately. Um, but so over time, we started identifying the areas where we could apply AI, where we could build it. And so, for example, earlier this year, after finally, 4 years, we put an AI feature in our mobile app where you can now scan any trading card. And it'll tell you exactly what it is, potentially the range of what it's worth, and all that's using AI data from the past few decades to generate those insights. And it does it within seconds. But so all of that AI is built by the team. It took them a while tinkering and finding these things and building new technologies and leveraging the latest innovations. But so internally in our products, that's one way that we did it. The other way, which I think is more interesting and probably more applicable to companies in general, is with corporate usage. There are so many AI tools that are supposed to help with things like your finances, or with hiring, or with finding data. And so there are all these platforms coming up touting AI, customer care, right? AI agents, blah, blah, blah. So we, at any given point, are experimenting with 15 to 30 different startups, platforms, et cetera. It's just one of the values I really instilled in my team, is to always balance building things and the product development with experimentation and thinking about the next 2 to 5 years. So all of our teams are experimenting with all these tools to generate code, do automated code reviews, detect incidents before they happen, and heal them. And then all the way from work with the finance team to see, can we automate closing the books every month? Can we actually automate recruiting and looking through resumes, and even doing things like writing performance reviews for everyone? Can we actually have something that can search through every single bit of corporate data that we have to produce an insight of, like, how many customers did we serve last month? How many customers did we serve today? How many might we serve tomorrow? What's the revenue for today? And just pulling data from different sources and coming up with that. What we found is a couple things. Firstly, tools are still not in a great place, because a lot of AI is actually just a wrapper around an LLM, and LLMs are still very, from a technical side of things, they're kind of brute force. They're if-else statements underneath. They're basically just like logic trees. And so they're going to jump to conclusions. They're going to make up information where you didn't provide it. They're not going to ask the right questions. It's still very primitive. And so, for example, going back to one of the questions I was just mentioning, if I ask it, how much revenue did we have last quarter? And then I ask it a new instance, same question, how much revenue did I have next quarter? Tools that are supposed to be producing consistent in numbers are not. They give me two different numbers of how much revenue we have. Now imagine we close the books in an automated way, in
With
that
that.
way. And imagine, yeah, with that, and even like private company, let alone a public company doing that. Like, there's no way you'd use
No.
these tools for that. So there's certain things like that where the tools just aren't ready. But there are certain things where going through performance reviews right now. I am so impressed with the ability to use these tools to pull information where I can ask it, hey, show me all the interactions I had with Kathy in 2025 and the ways I worked with her. And here's a career ladder for her role. And can you actually sort the information in a way that will help me write a review about her? Here are the questions I have for the review. Can you actually draft out the responses for that review? It writes, especially because I've been working with my LLM for a while now. It wrote a draft of the review that sounds exactly the way that I would have written it with the same points I would have written. And I tested it because I did like, I'm going to write my own and then I'm going to test it with the AI and then see how close it gets. It was almost exact. It actually found things, of course, that I didn't even mention because of recency bias, etc. So it was actually a more unbiased review than what I had written for my reports. And so for that sort of technology, it's pretty amazing now. But as I talk to all these companies, and we're experimenting with all these startups, all these big companies too, like the Google, Salesforce, Microsoft's, OpenAI's, they say the same thing to us, which is really surprising to me, which is we rarely work with companies that are experimenting and as open-minded as you. And to me, that's a scary thing. Why aren't more companies experimenting and open to this? And I realize it's because they may not have data security policies in place. They may not know of how to experiment or tinker. They may be afraid of change. In some cases, it's the money. It does cost, like we do have a budget set aside for these sorts of things. But to be honest, especially being design partners for a lot of these companies, it doesn't take any money. They're willing to give us a 4 to 6 month free trial, and we get to shape their product. And we don't even give them real data in a lot of cases. The thing that they're looking for is actually real life business cases because they're trying to find traction, right? And to me, even if I only get like a year, 2 years of value from them before they disappear because they, lose funding, or whatever, that's 1 or 2 years where of um, benefit where we can use that money somewhere else or do something else. Um, but even in the experimentation phase, it's not like we're giving them real data or have any risk of things, like a business sensitive context failing. We're controlling things on our side as well. I think the harder part is as a company, you really need to be thoughtful about what problems you need solved. And that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Those problems should always be the same, whether or not it's AI solving it or not. The problems you have within your company that you're solving for your customers, the problems you have that you want to solve in order to increase revenue, reduce costs, those problems are likely the same problems today and tomorrow in the world where AI is solving it. So figure out what those problems are and then try to look for AI solutions that'll solve those faster than the manual solutions. That's how everyone should be approaching it.
So smart, so smart. And the idea of, you know, we think that these innovations are so walled that you can't access them. But I remember I went to a science and technology magnet school. I was part of the second graduating class, and the administration was so open-minded and curious like you. They went to Sun Microsystems, they went to Apple, and they cut deals to give us the newest technology at a tremendous discount. And,
Yep.
it was the same idea, though. At the time, I didn't understand these concepts, but this idea that these companies, it's in their interest to get more usability studies
Right.
essentially out there.
Yep.
And these are very, very low cost ways for them to get the data
Mhm.
they need, just like you have to test
Yep.
within your company, right? And
Yep.
so if they can get that smattering of people using, companies using their tools, it benefits them, in which case you actually can get a relationship built that is very, very economically favorable to everyone.
To everyone. Yeah.
So
It's the
smart.
it's the Venn diagram. The what's in it for
Yes.
me, right? What's in it for
Yeah,
me for you? What's in it for me for them? And there's that middle section. That's where you should put your AI solution.
totally. So Dan, I mean, we're coming on the end of our conversation. We could go on for hours. I love talking to you. I'm sure the folks who are on the phone listening also feel the same way. What you seem unflappable. The stories that you've told, the family history, which for some people would feel that would feel like trauma that would result in more fear, more concern. Uh, is there anything that gets you bent out of shape at work and or outside of work? And how do you then recenter yourself and ground yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the thing that really affects me the most at work is when we aren't trying to push ourselves to be better. Is it, especially at companies like I FactSet was a great company. It taught me a lot of my foundation of how to modernize systems, what things look like at scale, how big public company works. But the thing that really got to me after being there for 10 years was people were coasting. The majority of people, I would say, are coasting. And some of them didn't even realize it. And it's because everything was just so big and internal, and you're really only talking to yourselves, like year after year. You're looking around a little bit at innovations, but you don't really need to innovate. Their customers may or may not care about innovation. And so it's so easy just to make a little more money, just keep going down the path you're going. But me being an entrepreneur and always wanting to change the world in more and more positive ways, it really was just grinding me. And so, even at the startups I've been at, though, you still have people who they're taking the safer route. And it's good. I'm not, again, I actually surround myself with some of those people because I want to have people that think differently from me to challenge me because we'll come up with something better than any one of us could come up on our own. Um, but the thing that always gets me is when we're just aiming so low and we're just like, oh, like we can do this plus one or like this times two sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, but there's this exponential thing that's just out of reach that I think we can actually get kind of close to. I'll give a really quick example. So end of last year, so just about a year ago, actually, um, we were considering an acquisition, and it was to get into this business line that was a very interesting business, but that I felt like the product, the technology, it's not really differentiated. And we are actually in a better position than them to succeed in that area. And so I actually feel like we could go ahead and build it ourselves. I don't think that we need to make this expensive acquisition. And the head of business development, whose deal it was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Now, my product counterpart, um, and I'm very happy that he is this way because like then we become like a yin and yang. But he's like, no, there like we don't have the time for this or the priority. There's not enough resourcing, and we just need to keep our heads focused on the roadmap that exists, and it's already like it takes us through the end of next year. And so generally, like we meet somewhere in the middle because we balance each other out. In this case, I actually just felt so firmly in this bet. That I'm like, no, I really believe that I'm going to take this bet and that we can take this bet and we can actually like prove this out. So if you can give me a month and not make that deal for a month, hold off on it. I think I can show enough progress to convince you otherwise. And they both were like, all right, like, let's see what we can do. And it was, like December anyway, end of the year, things are slow. They weren't going to revisit the deal until January anyway. Okay, fine. You have 1 month. So I turn around to one of my VPs and I say, hey, here's the idea. And he also was on the same page as me, like, oh, I'm convinced we can do this. So I gave him a little bit of budget. He set aside two bounties. So just like cash bonuses. And we said, okay, so here are a couple of engineers. So, guys, here is the project that we would like you to pursue. You have 4 weeks to get as far as you can. Go. And so, last 2 weeks of the year are moratorium, meaning we don't submit any new changes to our services, our websites, anything. So, like code freeze, essentially. So, they had that time plus 2 weeks in the new year. They actually, within 3 weeks, got a proof of concept up and running. And so we show it to the head of business development and the head of product, and they were like, well, okay, I guess we're not making that deal. Showed to the CEO. Everyone was so optimistic about it. We went ahead and just declined making that acquisition. Went ahead and built the product ourselves. And within weeks, it became a hugely successful product for us. And so it generated millions of dollars in revenue. But it all started with the confidence that we can make this bet and it will work.
Yes, yes, and it's worth fighting for.
Worth fighting for. Yep.
That's incredible. Dan, this was so fantastic. I mean, I think, there were so many things that I walked away with from this conversation. Just to recap a few of them, the idea that just always being curious and being willing to try, being willing to see what is better, what the possibilities are, and put your stake in the ground and say, give me a month. Let me go try to prove it out. And, letting people imagine that to be possible. I've loved the examples of how, we talked about tech leadership. Not once did you say, oh my gosh, the burden's so hard, the pressure's so big, blah, blah. All you talked about was how to go and bring people along, how to surround yourself with people who challenge you, how to make sure that as an organization we get to the North Star. Tech is just the pathway, the how you get there. As you said, these are the tools, they are not the end game. The end game is still the vision of what you're delivering for your customers. And I think the thing that really struck me the most, because you said it several times, was your why. The why you do your work, the why you lead the way that you do. You have such a clarity about the people that helped you get to where you are today. And you do everything you do in a way to honor them.
Mhm. Yeah. I think like it's one of the things I've reflected on early in life where no matter how high, low, rich, poor, whatever you are, there's always people above you and there are always people below you. And the helping people below you, it doesn't do anything but help everyone else out. It helps you, it helps them. Um, and at some point you are below others and you could use the help as well. And imagine a world where we're all helping each other where we were helping each other get the maximum. And I know that you do this for a living, but helping like everyone to actually be the best version of themselves, like how much more fulfilling life could be for each one of us, but also how much better the world could be for all of us. And so I do find it, that drives me every day to get out of bed and try to help everyone to be the best version of themselves and hopefully not make the same mistakes that I did.
Well, I hope they make some of the same mistakes that you did, because they wouldn't have been able to go then make all of the successes that you've made happen too, right? They all go together. And Dan, if people want to, get more from you, stay connected to what you're doing, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active, mostly on LinkedIn. And so it's the linkedin.com/in/Dan Tran. I have my website, danvantran.com, that has some other media handles as well. But those are the two best ways to contact me.
That's amazing. And of course, folks can visit collectors.com and get engaged in the collectors world and see the amazing products that you all are creating. Thank you so much, Dan. My name is Kathy Wu Brady, and I write Lead Without Limits on Substack. I'm a former C suite executive that is now a coach and an artist. And it is a real gift to have conversations like this with leaders like Dan, who exemplify, I think, what the best in leadership can mean, what it can create in terms of possibilities for business, but what it can create for people. And so thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
Bye bye, everyone.